Well, I hope you enjoyed our chat with Swedish Dr. Sebastian Rushworth, as even the Brits are now asking, is Sweden proof we got it all horribly wrong? I've been saying this for months now. In fact, I first said it on this show in early April, that we should be following the Swedish example and practicing voluntary social distancing, common sense restrictions on the size of crowds, no lockdown, and keeping our economy intact. The failure of our political classes and the absurd national cabinet to take seriously the Swedish example is something our children and their children will be paying a very heavy price for. And that's not the only thing I've been warning about on this show. I would love $1 for every time Rita, James and I have warned about the pernicious influence of identity politics and the way in which the left's political correctness ideology is corrupting the very essence of what makes Western societies so successful. Nearly every great Western invention, idea, creation, concept or product was itself the result of a relentless and competitive quest for perfection. As Ava said, because we're number 2, we try harder. It's the priorities of a nation that determine its destiny. If you prioritise freedom, individual choice, opportunity and the striving for personal success and excellence, guess what? You create the greatest societies on earth and you bequeath them to your children. But the moment you change those priorities and opt instead to prioritise things like skin colour, ethnic background, indigeneity, sexuality or gender preference over the quest for excellence, the successful, prosperous world you once lived in inevitably will crumble. Diversity training is all the rage amongst our woke corporations and our public service. You'll remember Martin Parkinson, the former top public servant in Canberra, who insisted all our public servants go through unconscious bias training to teach them basically to become racists and sexists who choose people to perform a task not on their ability to do so or their merit, but by their gender or their colour. The great lie is that this makes us stronger. It doesn't. It corrodes us. In America, a slide was leaked from a diversity training manual at Goodyear, the tyre manufacturer, showing what attire or logos were acceptable for employees to wear to work. Black Lives Matter and anything LGBT is acceptable, but anything that said, for example, all lives matter, or Make America Great Again, or even Blue Lives Matter, the slogan that supports the police forces, was unacceptable. So here we have one of the great corporations, capitalist corporations, advocating Marxism and atheism whilst denigrating the rule of law. This is grotesque, and Donald Trump's response was immediate. He tweeted, "Don't buy Goodyear tyres. Get better tyres for far less." And he added, "This is what the radical left Democrats do. Two can play the same game, and we have to start playing it now." And Trump is absolutely right on this, as he is on most things. Cancel culture may be the mongrel offspring of political correctness, but it can cut both ways. Companies must learn that the price for this dangerous virtue signalling is very, very high indeed. Go woke and you will go broke. Goodyear is the number 3 selling tyre in Australia. I will never touch them or their other brand, Dunlop, ever again. It's strictly Bridgestone or Michelin for me from now on. You're invited to join me. What a pity there isn't an Aussie brand making tyres. That would be the one I'd go for if it existed. Then there's this week's asinine corporate comment from insurance giant Suncorp, whose cash earnings nosedived by 30% this week. What was their CEO focused on? Better service, better advice, lower premiums? Oh no, he was blathering on about climate change. Clearly, if these clowns think the planet is coming to an end because of burping cows and Queensland coal mines, I wouldn't trust them to insure my outdoor dunny. Now, ultimately, all private companies are free to make whatever choices they like and either keep the customers satisfied or not. But the real danger, as I alluded to earlier, is when this corruption enters the public sphere, when the institutions the taxpayer relies on head down this same dangerous, self-destructive path. And unfortunately, that is exactly what has happened. And this week we saw it in all its glaring ugliness at the Victorian inquiry into the disastrous hotel quarantine fiasco. As Rita, James and I discussed earlier, a health department official working in Victoria's hotel quarantine claims he didn't get any training on basic infection control. None. But he did complete a lesson on diversity. No lesson in how to do an effective quarantine, but a lesson in how to employ people by the colour of their skin or their genitalia. What an absolute disgrace. and the perfect metaphor for what we have done to our once revered institutions. Political correctness kills. And then there was this nonsense spouted by another witness at the inquiry.
I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Burong, Wurundjeri, and the Kulin Nation people.
Well, this virtue signalling nonsense. When you're sitting in a modern building with a legal entity trying to get to the truth or otherwise of why you and your company completely stuffed up the job they were given to do to protect the health of the public, allow me to suggest, however delicately, however sensitively, that the history of who may or may not have lived 2 centuries ago on or near the block of land the building you happen to be sitting on was built on is slightly irrelevant. It's not your number one priority. You cannot do a professional job unless doing that job to the very best of your abilities is your number one priority. You will, by definition, always fall short if you're attempting to pander to this intangible, nonsensical, inconsistent randomness of the platitudes of political correctness and identity ideology. We must now wonder just how corrupted have all our once trusted public institutions become at the hands of hopelessly compromised and inept identity politicians of the left and, unfortunately, of the Liberal Party. And speaking of whom, I caused quite a stir 3 weeks ago when I suggested on this show that Dan Andrews and his chief medical bureaucrats could be charged under Victoria's own recently introduced workplace manslaughter laws. When Craig Kelly made a similar observation the next day, Labor and the Lovies all squealed from the rafters, and the ABC even fact-checked the claim and said there was zero chance. Well, yet again, they were wrong with your money. This week, Robert Gottliebson, writing in the Australian Business Review, claimed that parts of the Victorian Public Service and members of Daniel Andrews' cabinet are going to be exposed to the danger of the state's tough penalties for unsafe work practices that contribute to deaths. And he claimed the first legal step to determine whether community standards apply to the government actions in the COVID-19 pandemic was taken yesterday. Gottliebson writes in intricate detail about why the political class are themselves liable under the industrial manslaughter law and concludes, as I did, as Craig Kelly did, that Dan Andrews and his top public servants could well be charged with negligence. And then Mirko Bagaric, the Dean of Swinburne Law School, wrote in The Australian that the hotel quarantine fiasco is likely to lead to the largest class action in Australian history, one that effectively could bankrupt the state of Victoria, that it is almost inevitable that a negligence action will be launched and that the principal target of the class action will be the Victorian government. And he makes this critical point: the test for negligence is an objective one. It is irrelevant how pure or sanctimonious were the intentions or motivations of those individuals involved. Sanctimonious intentions and motivations, also known as identity politics and virtue signalling. Insidious forces that are destroying and corrupting so many of our once prized and valued and successful businesses and institutions.